They teed that up really nicely for me. Didn't even coordinate here, but He knows you. Remember that throughout the rest of this message today, and know that is perhaps the greatest truth about you today. We are finishing up this day, this last Sunday of Lent. How did that happen? Where did the time go? 6 weeks ago, we started a series through the book of Ecclesiastes. And today we're going to finish up. Not that we've read everything that there is to read in Ecclesiastes. We've had little portions here and there. Has anyone actually sat through and read all of Ecclesiastes over the last 6 weeks? Okay, there's a few folks. Let me encourage you that if you've got a little taste for Ecclesiastes that cannot be satisfied, right? Go ahead and read the entire book. And you could probably do it in a really short setting at any time. But today we're just going to read the last few verses of the teacher from chapter 12. If you'd like to turn in your Bibles, if you're using the Pew Bibles, we will have the page numbers there on the screen for you. And so we're going to read these final words, these concluding words. If you feel sort of like you've been tossed in the air and you're wondering, what is the conclusion? That's what today is all about. So if I don't conclude this, if I don't land the plane today, it's my fault, right? So listen to what the narrator comes in and says today, verse 9 of Ecclesiastes 12. Not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to the people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails. Given by one shepherd. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them. Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now all has been heard. Here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. So 6 weeks ago, Pastor Aaron started us off on this journey that probably most of you will never forget, right? This has been one of the most memorable sermon series, I think, for us. And we were introduced to two different characters through the book. The very first verse of Ecclesiastes brings along the character that we call the narrator. And he's only in here for one verse. And then he hands the mic over to the second character, who is the teacher. And the teacher, we've been hearing from him over the last 5 weeks. He's been introducing to us this concept. You know the saying. Go ahead and say it with me here. Hevel, hevel, everything is hevel. A little check on learning here this morning. Aaron already said it, but other than the words meaningless and vanity in your translation, who can just say out loud, what does hevel mean? Just say out the words. Vapor, smoke, mist. Yeah, okay, we got it. So they did remember things that we've said over the last few weeks, and so that's good. We like to hear that. Life under the sun is hevel. It's mist, it's a fog, it's a vapor. You said it well from the reading from Psalm this morning. Life under the sun is temporary, and we fight against that. Life doesn't always make sense. In that sense, it is hevel. Pleasures that we want to satisfy us don't satisfy us for very long. It is hevel. This is life under the sun. And throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, the teacher has challenged all of our assumptions. Am I right? Are there any assumptions that you've held before this that the teacher hasn't challenged? And perhaps that's a little disorienting for us. And as Aaron said in week 1, the teacher was going to take us to the edge of a cliff, but he wasn't going to let us fall off the edge of the cliff. And I'm thankful for that, because there's been times, I don't know about you, but reading through Ecclesiastes, you're like, man, I hope there's some good news after this. And there's just been just enough to keep us from going over the cliff and saying nothing matters, right? Because there are some things that do matter. And so the narrator comes in at the end of this book, and he's going to reinforce the little truths that the teacher sort of brought along to keep us from going over the edge of the cliff. And these are truths that if you are going through a life that seems a little foggy, then these are truths that can be a lighthouse to you. And it's not a lot. It's very, very simple. This may be one of the most simple messages I've ever preached, and I appreciate that, and I'm sure you appreciate that as well. And so the first conclusion that we see from the narrator as he comes in and sort of puts a bow tie on what the teacher has said is this: do as I say, not as I did. Do as I say, not as I did. Let me reread these words from verses 9 through 11. Not only was the teacher wise, but he also imparted knowledge to people. He pondered and searched out and set in order many proverbs. The teacher searched to find just the right words, and what he wrote was upright and true. The words of the wise are like goads, their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails, given by one shepherd. I always like reading Eugene Peterson's Message translation, just to kind of see what his thoughts are on the passage. And this is, listen to these words, and they'll be on the screen. This is Eugene Peterson's translation of the same verses. And he calls the teacher the quester, by the way. So the teacher is one who's going on a quest to find happiness and fulfillment. Okay? And so he says, besides being wise himself, the quester also taught others knowledge. He weighed, examined, and arranged many proverbs. The quester did his best to find the right words and write the plain truth. The words of the wise prod us to live well. They're like nails hammered home, holding life together. They are given by God, the one shepherd. Now the phrase, do as I say, not as I do. I'm sure you've heard that. And usually when we hear that, do you receive that in a positive frame of mind if someone says to you, do as I say, not as I do? No, because oftentimes we associate that with someone who's acting hypocritical, right? Perhaps it's a parent who wants to teach their kids morals that they themselves aren't willing to live themselves. Am I right? Have any of us parents been in that situation, right? Do as I say, not as I do, is what we might say to our kids if we were trying to get away with something. Now, how many of you, now I don't want to say that what the teacher has been doing throughout Ecclesiastes is that he's been hypocritical. In fact, it's been just the opposite. And so I sort of changed it and from do as I say, not as I do, to do as I say, not as I did, right? Past tense. The things that I've done, look at my example and don't do those. So, anyone bought anything on Amazon recently? Yeah? Did anyone look at the reviews? Anyone just like incessantly look at the reviews, right? And what are the things that matter when you look at reviews on let's just say Amazon, right? For me, it's how many reviews are there? Because a product could have 5 stars, but if there's one review on there, is that enough of, so people kind of letting you know what's going on? So a lot of times you go to the reviews and you can read all of the different things that people are saying about the product. And maybe something has 4.5 stars, right? And there's 1,000 reviews, and you're like, man, this has got to be a good product. Does anyone actually go and read the 1-star reviews? Yeah. That's important, right? I mean, you know that nothing is perfect, and chances are you might get something that someone else has received and they've had an issue with it, right? And so oftentimes we'll do that. We'll do these reviews on Amazon, or perhaps if you go out to a new restaurant. Isn't that awesome to be able to go and read reviews about a restaurant? I mean, back in the day, if you wanted to know whether a hole in the wall was going to give you a stomach bug, you just had to go and test it out, right? You just had to take fate in your own hands, right? And so now you can go online, read Google reviews, and see, has anyone in the last 2 months been there and complained about being sick, right? And so a while back, actually, one way to illustrate this is when we were in Texas, actually, that we were having a lot of rains, a lot of flooding, and I saw on the news there was a car that was heading towards a flooded roadway, and they saw there was another car that at some point before them had stalled out in the flooded roadway. And so you see this car live on the news, and they just think they're going to be able to do better than this other car that stalled out. Shock of all shocks. You'll never guess what happened, right? And so not long after that, there was this slogan that they would put on the roadways in Texas: turn around, don't drown, right? You think it would just be common sense, right? You see someone who's stalled out, And you say, well, I better not keep going forward on this path. I better turn around and go the other way. And so the teacher, throughout the last 5 weeks, he's written his review of all of the pleasures of life. And he's been on a quest to see which one of these gives ultimate fulfillment and happiness in life. And what's his conclusion? He says, none of them satisfy completely. And in fact, if we give ourselves fully to any one of these, then usually doom and destruction is going to be ours. And so that is the review of the teacher. We've read his review, and so now the narrator comes in at the very end. And it's like he says, listen, the teacher has been on this quest. He let us know about this quest, so don't even pack your bags for the same journey, right? Don't even go down that road where you see it's flooding. Go another way. There is another way. And so here's the other way. This is the last part of the conclusion. And it's simple, really simple. It's fear God. You can either go down one way and make a God out of all of the different pleasures of life, or make a God of ourselves, or we can go the only other way that brings life and happiness and light into our life, and that is to fear the one who made us in the first place. And so from verses 12 through 14, the teacher says, "Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them," to the teachings that he's laid out. "Of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body." Any college students in here? Yeah? Much study wearies the body? Or maybe that maybe invigorates Josh. Maybe I'm looking at the wrong person, right? Much study wearies the body. We talked about that last night. Verse 13, "Now all has been heard, and here is the conclusion of the matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil." Mark Lowry is a comedian that we grew up watching as kids, a Christian comedian. And one of the stories that he tells is growing up, he claims to be a rather rambunctious kid who didn't listen to his mom. He would always say that he used the word sassin. He said he would sass his mom. Anyone familiar when I say the word sass? Are you sitting with someone who's a good sasser? Anyone? Has anyone ever been told, "Don't give me that sass talk," right? Yeah. Okay, right down here. Don't give me that sass talk. Mark loved arguing with his mom, and so one of the things that his mom would say when she had it up to here with his smart aleck antics is she would say, "Mark, now you better let me have the last word. You better let me have the last word." And Mark knew that if he didn't give his mom the last word, his dad was going to have the last word, right? I mean, anyone grew up in that kind of household? That was us right there. If we didn't give our mom the last word, she just zipped her lip, and dad came home, and we just knew he was coming in with a belt at some point, right? That was how it was going to happen. My friends, the narrator warns us from thinking we have to have the final word to what's already been said. Everything has been said. And so for us to continue to look, because we can look, and we will find other words, other philosophies, other people that claim to be wise who say, here's another road, here's another way to live life and be happy. We live in a culture that really says to us that there is another way, and it's the way of personal happiness, personal fulfillment, personal contentment, and that's what it's all about. That if you find that, then you've lived the best life ever. The idolatry of our time in this day and age is the God of self. The God of self puts itself on the throne and says, you said it this morning in your prayer time, that we can stand before God and claim to have wisdom apart from him. And so we know that there are endless amounts of self-help books and articles and magazines and websites and conferences that we can go to, and a lot of them will tell us exactly what we want to hear. And when one cultural fad is over, guess what? There's another one coming on the horizon, right? And so what the narrator is talking about, what the teacher's been talking about, is not a fad. It's a truth that has been true since before the foundation of the world. And so that's why he says, all has been heard. There's nothing more. The things that people are saying that sound new today, are they new? You look around and cultures have been talking about these same things over and over and over again. It's just a recycle. It's just a repeating of human thoughts and human error. And so it's this never-ending cycle. And so here is the conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments. And then I like the next part of that verse. It says, for this is the duty of all mankind. Another way, if you look in some of the Hebrew for that, it says, for this is the whole of mankind. This is the reason why we were created, was to fear God, to live in the light of God's wisdom, and to do things the way God would have us to do them. And so one of the challenges for us is when we hear the word fear, when we say fear God, is that our idea of the word fear is not necessarily what the Hebrew word has in mind. It's not like the horror movie genre fear, right? That's not what we're talking about, running from a bloodthirsty God who's getting ready to stab you, right? That's not the kind of fear that we're talking about. Perhaps some other words that would better suit the word for fear in the Hebrew is awe or reverence. But we don't really, I think we're kind of disconnected from awe and reverence in our culture today, so that even seems a little bit weak. And so let me sort of illustrate this idea of fear in this way. How many of you heard the phrase growing up, I brought you into this world and I can take you out of it? Yeah. Did you ever think your parents were going to kill you? Well, I don't know. There may be some of you that, but yeah, I brought you in this world, I can take you out of it. And usually that's said in jest by parents to remind their kids, you should have a little bit of humility, right? You didn't will yourself into existence in this world. You didn't just come about, like, there's so much that's about you that you don't owe to yourself, right? And so you ought to have a little more humility in your judgments in the way that you do things. And so likewise for us, he brought us into this world, right? At the end of the day, he's going to take us on back at some point in some form or fashion. And so our existence in this universe, and indeed the entire universe's existence, is because Yahweh spoke it into being in the very first place. It all goes back to his first initiative, to create out of love in the first place. And so from the very smallest cell of the human body, or the smallest cell in nature that we have to have the most powerful microscope to view, or to view the universe through the James C. Webb telescope, with these pictures, with colors that we've never seen before. My friends, the God who created everything from the smallest to the largest breathed his energizing spirit into you. He created you for himself, to know him, to fear him, to love him, to be in awe of him as you live on this pale blue dot. That's one of my favorite pictures. You probably can't see it from where you're sitting, but there's an arrow, so you can trust me. And that right next to that arrow, there's a picture of Voyager 1 back in 1990, 3.7 billion miles away from the Earth, turned around and took a picture of Earth. And if you're wondering where you are today, you are that speck of dust suspended in a ray of light. If you don't feel small looking at that picture, I don't know what else will make you feel small. Perhaps one of the problems with us, the reason why we have a hard time understanding the fear of God, is because we really only fear ourselves. We fear ourselves. We put ourselves on the throne. We put ourselves in the center of the universe. And it's like pictures like that remind us we are so far from being the center of the universe. And yet, my friends, to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that apart from God, we are not even dust. perhaps that'll give us a little bit of humility that we're talking about. The fear of God is inviting us to take a step back and to realize we don't hold the world in our hands. We control actually very little of what happens in this world and what's going to happen in history. And so those who insist on having the final word before God, if you want to be like Mark Lowry and insist on having the final word, you're going to be sorely disappointed, because as the narrator closes out, this is his final words. He says, "For God will indeed bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, anything that we want to hide away or obscure, whether it is good or evil." And so we can release ourselves from the temptation to want to have the final word, and we can affirm in the Apostles' Creed as we do that he will come again to judge the living and the dead. There's one true judge. He's got the final say. And so we're just going to close out this series today. We're going to close out this message with these words that we heard as we started this season of Lent. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. You are dust, and to dust you shall return. And beloved, if you are dust, then there's no better thing for you than to love and to fear the potter, because the potter makes beautiful things of dust. Would you say that with me today? The potter makes beautiful things of dust. Let us pray.